بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So today is our Friday Halaqah, and we are continuing with our Rumi stories. And last week there was a little bit of a technical hitch, so I'm going to go over some of the stories because they were very beautiful stories that we did last week. And just to go over what is happening, there is, subhanallah, there's a lot going on in the world right now, but for Muslims, alhamdulillah, we are in the blessed days of Dhul Hajj, and we are fasting and praying and doing everything that we hope that will please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept our ibadah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for us to pray and to worship Allah as we are supposed to worship Him, and use our time in these very, very blessed days to really come close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Normally there is a universal Hajj during this time, but because of the COVID, there is a very limited Hajj. Normally the whole Ummah gets involved in the Hajj because even though they don't all go, everybody doesn't go every year, but there is saying goodbye and preparations for the people who are going, and the excitement for them, for those people who are going. And then when they return, then we wait eagerly for their stories and their experiences, and to be just a little bit part of it, of that experience. And so this year, subhanallah, we're going to be missing that, but still that doesn't mean, just because the world stops doesn't mean that our ibadah stops for Allah. We have to praise Allah, and we have to do what we have to do despite what is happening outside. In fact, in spite of, we should do more. We should do more so that we can get close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And these are really, really, I mean, if we knew how blessed these days were, then we would really try our best to avail ourselves of them. You know, I was talking to somebody yesterday, a lady who doesn't know how to read Quran in Arabic, and I was asking her what she's doing these days, and she said to me that she tries to read her 3 juz. She says, I'm trying to read my 3 juz, and I was taken aback because she doesn't read Arabic, but she's going to read her 3 juz in English. So subhanallah, it means that whichever language you are, you can read the Quran, you have to take that opportunity and read the Quran. And really the Quran is like that the more you read it and the more you interact with it, the more joy you will have inside you. You know, everybody is suffering right now, and people are suffering from all kinds of different things. There's sadness and there's grief after losing people, and then there's anxiety about the future. And you know, for people who believe, we have resources. Allah has given us resources, and the biggest resource is to read the Quran and understand it. Because if you continuously open the book, Allah's book, and you read some of the words, and you try, even though maybe the first time, second time, you like kind of go through stuff and it doesn't come to you, but if you keep doing this, then slowly the words will start to mean something to you, and they will, you know, you will start to read it like it is Allah's book, that He is talking to you. This is His message just for you. So this is the idea, that we we stick ourselves and our time, we use our time very, very productively. And if we put a time down for the Quran, like after Maghrib I'm going to read, or half an hour before Maghrib I have to read my Quran, after Fajr I've got to read my Quran, then you have to be very strict about it. That means you can't do anything else at that time. You have to do that Quran at that time, the dhikr at that time. And this discipline and that drip of following that discipline is what will create a spiritual life, right? That even when you put it down, you plan your week. A week planning is better than a day planning, because then you can plan ahead and do things ahead. And so in that, you block your time for your ibadah. And if especially for these 10 days, you can start this month, you can start doing that if you haven't done it before. So you block that time, and then when that time is blocked, you have to do that at that time, and there's nothing else, there's no substitute for that. And so that's a good way of doing that. And generally there's a lot of time wasting these days. And now the excuse is that, oh, on social media there's so many nice speeches and so many talks and this and that, and we flip from one thing to another to another. So we listen to so much, but there's rarely any practice, because we're just so involved in just listening. And this is and now we're getting used to listening to sound bites. That means that it has to be within a certain amount of time, otherwise our attention doesn't go to it. So any lecture which is like involves learning and you giving your time and actually engaging in it, there are few and few people who are interested in that, because everybody wants to sensationalize 5 minutes, 7 minutes, and the speakers are even doing that. The celebrity speakers, they're getting onto this bandwagon of, it has to be times, because people don't have time to listen to this. So I have to fit it into this much. And so we get this sensational message, and we're like, for those few seconds, we're like, yes, wow, that's so amazing. But rarely do we get into it and we apply it. So there's a difference between listening to something, actively listening to something. That's a different thing. That means you block your time and you sit down and you actually listen, make notes, and then after it's done, you figure out, okay, how am I going to implement this? And then the third thing is the action, which is the most important thing, because with this explosion of information, there's so much information at everybody's fingertips that people are just getting carried away with listening, it's like flitting from one party to another, and that is what we're doing online, because there's just so much out there. So the message is that choose what you want to. There's lots of good scholarly bayans, the lectures out there. So choose what you want to listen to and make notes, be active in it, and then sit down and say that this is what I got out of it and this is what I'm going to do with it, inshallah. So keep looking at your intentions, and keep looking at learning, and actively learning, so that you can be active, you can be proactive in your life. It's important to be proactive. Right, so the story I'm going to start with today is about it's about the imaginary illness, and it's about a teacher who ran an old-fashioned primary school, and he taught its 30 pupils how to read the Holy Quran and other books. The students would arrive at the school early, bringing their lunches with them, and stay until evening. During their lessons, they had no chance to play except on Fridays. In the old days, there was no grade or high schools like those we have today. In the old-fashioned primary school, children would start with learning the alphabet and memorizing parts of the Holy Quran. They would learn to read and write and study some works of literature. When they had finished, they would either go about their business or trade, or enter a religious school to continue their studies in Arabic and the religious sciences. In those schools, there were no such things as a special hour for relaxation, play, or exercise, nor were there summer or winter vacations. The cost of studies was serious and difficult, with little opportunity for fooling around. Now, this is a big contrast to the schools that we have today. And without going into that whole educational debate, you'd be surprised to know that state schools, or public schools, as we call them, there's a lot of busy work in them. And the actual learning that they do throughout the whole day, like some kids, they go at 7 o'clock and they come home at 3. So the actual learning they do will be for 2 hours. Uh, because all the other work is mostly busy work. Even in the classroom, the teacher is checking on other kids' work and, asking questions or diffusing situations, putting out fires. So there is so much time wasting going on like that. And this is the argument actually for doing classical education, number one, and number two, for homeschooling, for people who are like on the fence about homeschooling. Can we do it? Can't we do it? Well, you can do it, and you are doing it right now because public schools are closed. But this is the argument for it, that it will take you about 2 hours of quality teaching to get the whole homeschooling done. So your involvement as a parent, as a teacher, would be for 2 hours. Then the child obviously has to do their work and their own self-study or homework, as we call it. But that's the amount of time you need to give to it. So it's not a huge amount of time. So anyway, in the olden days, in this traditional way of learning, um, when they went to school, they didn't have things like entertainment or relaxation hours or big lunch breaks. They had to get on with what they had to do. So getting back to the story, besides that, the mullah in charge could strike misbehaving or slow students. The boys couldn't laugh or talk loudly as they were being trained to be polite. The teacher was very severe, and there is a famous verse about this. If the child is too lenient, if the teacher is too lenient, the children will play games in the bazaar. So there was this idea of this authoritarian kind of a teacher who, taught and ruled with the stick. And most of it was like that, but I'm sure that not all of it was like that. But this is the scenario that we have here in front of us in this story. From this, we can see that play and games were considered frivolous. Teachers would rage in school and frighten their pupils with stern glances. They compelled the students to pay strict attention. Thus, the students feared their teachers and showed them much respect. For good or bad, that's the way things were. Just the same, children in those days had a greater interest in play and games and would grow tired of their lessons. They looked forward to the Eid festivals and holidays. If the school was closed for 2 or 3 days holiday, they would rejoice because they would at last find some time to play. So in the quarter of the city where our story takes place, there were two such primary schools. One was called the Sheikh School and the other the Mullah School. And one day, one of the mullah's students was on his way to school and he saw several of the students of the Sheikh's school playing in the street. He asked why they weren't in school. The Sheikh is sick and the school's been closed for 3 or 4 days, they replied. The teacher went on to his school where the mullah began to teach the class as usual. When the teacher left the room on some errand, the student said to his classmates, "Have you heard the news?" "What news?" they asked. "The Sheikh's school is closed." "Why?" "The Sheikh is sick." "It's great for them that the Sheikh is sick," exclaimed the children. "But our teacher, Mr. Mullah, is firmly in his place. Will never get a few days off." One of the students, shrewder than the others, said, "If you listen to me, I can make it so that we can have a few days off from school too." "Okay, but how?" the students asked. "We'll make Mr. Mullah think that he's sick," said the rogue. "That's impossible." "Why, it's possible. I have a good plan, but it's only work if we all agree to stick together and say the same thing. It's too late today to do anything, but tonight I'll arrange things. Remember, we must all say the same thing. That's very important. Tomorrow we'll close the school, but today we'll have to do our lessons well so that the mullah will be pleased with us. When the mullah returned, the students recited the lessons much better than usual. In the evening, after the school had closed, the boys began to set their plan in motion for the next day. Since the mullah's living quarters were next to the school, he usually arrived before anyone else, but the students had agreed to gather at the school door early the next morning. The first to enter would be the most bold. He would be followed by 10 more of the most audacious one by one. They would set the plan into operation. Then the rest of the students would go in together and say what they had agreed to say. This was the plan. One by one, they would say to the mullah, "Yes, sir, you seem plain. You seem pale. Aren't you well? I pray for your recovery. In that way, he would gradually think that being sick and being ill was with an imaginary illness. So this was the plan, that all the students were going to go in and they were going to tell the teacher that he looked pale and he was sick. So the next morning, the students were gathered early at the school door. The cleverest amongst them entered first, and as soon as his eyes fell upon the mullah, he said, "Sir, may God protect you from calamity. Why are you so pale? God forbid that you become sick." The mullah replied, "No, it's nothing. Go to your place and start studying." But the mullah began to think, what did that mean? Have I become pale? I don't think so. Perhaps that's the way I appeared in this light. He's certainly mistaken. The second boy entered and greeted the mullah and then said, "Sir, it appears as though our teacher is not well today. I hope to God there is nothing wrong, but you seem to be very pale." The mullah, who was the master of the school, said, "Thank you, go and sit down." He fell into thought. The children can't be saying such things without reason. He took the mirror from its niche and examined the color of his face in it, but he couldn't see anything unusual. Still, he began to think. The third lad entered after greeting the mullah. He said, "Mr. Mullah, God forbid, but why are you so pale today? Perhaps you've caught a cold. I hope you get well soon." The mullah was gradually beginning to believe that his color was not normal. "Yes," he said, "I've caught a little cold. It's nothing. Go take your place." The fourth student entered and greeted his teacher. "Excuse me, sir, but you seem very pale and listless today. I hope it's not serious. But yesterday my father got like that. His head ached and he spent the whole day in bed." "I don't know," said the mullah. "I'm tired. I've got a cold. I feel a little weak, but it's nothing to worry about. Go sit down and begin reading your lesson." The mullah started thinking about headaches, and soon he felt that his head was aching a little. But since he wasn't sick, he started work. The fifth student entered, greeted the mullah and said, "Oh my God, sir, why are you so pale? May God protect you. There are a lot of colds going around these days. Yesterday, my brother got sick. The doctor prescribed rest and he's better now." The mullah was really feeling unwell now. It was as though his head was truly aching. He was seized with an overwhelming desire to lie down and rest. The sixth boy, then the seventh and the eighth came in one after another, all saying the same thing. Then the rest poured in together and all repeated the same thing. Doubt began to gnaw at the mullah, and he was convinced that he was indeed ill. The idea gained strength in his mind. His voice trembled. He thought that he couldn't see clearly, and his hands had lost their sense of touch. He thought, "Today, all of the students look at me and say that I'm not well. But this morning, my wife didn't say anything about my being pale and sick. What an uncaring wife I have. She doesn't think about my health at all." So he stood up and threw his cloak over his head and went to his own quarters. They were directly behind the school. He bawled out his wife, saying, "You can see that I'm not well, and don't even mention it. Other people's children are concerned about my welfare, but you don't care a thing about me." "I don't understand what you're talking about," she retorted. "You were perfectly fine this morning, and you still are as far as I can see." "Enough," cried the mullah. "What a selfish woman. You don't think about me at all. It's a fact. All women lack common sense. You don't understand anything. The students, as small as they are, saw that I am sick, but you didn't. Hurry up and prepare my bed. I want to sleep. I'm dying from the pain." And because he had caught the imaginary illness and his head ached, he began to moan softly. So the mullah went to bed. The children got wind of this and went to his room to inquire about him. The chief instigator said, "Now that things are thus, sir, if you give us permission, we will stay right here with you and continue our studies." Right, so we're going to pause here. A very interesting thing has happened, and we're going to look at the parallels of what words can do. Like, people can come to us and say things, and sometimes, as a coincidence, some people might say similar thing to us. A few people might say the same thing, and we might start believing in it, even though it's not true, right? And this is one way of this on an individual level, this can happen. And then on a collective level, this happens too. And, you know, we hear reports, one from here, one from there. You might see it on the news, false news, and we hear people talking about it. And then we start believing in it, right? Something to think about. A lot of propaganda is spread like this. And a lot of people use these kind of techniques when they want to bring another person down or to harm someone. So whenever somebody says something to you, first thing we should question is this true or is it untrue? And that's a very big question because we rarely ask this question. We don't sit down and we don't have the time to analyze. Right? We don't have the time to analyze, is this true or is it not true? And many times we just fall into the pit of believing, and you know, we start to believe something which isn't true, and then we make that truth, that untruth, become a truth. Right? We start believing in it, and then we start to perpetuate it, and then we make it our truth. And this is the story, unfortunately, of almost all human beings, that we carry around things which are not our own truths. They're other people's truths, or they've been given to us by society, or they've been given to us even by our parents or our families, but they're not really true, and they're not, certainly not our truths. So we really need to look at what we've been told, and is it a truth or isn't it a truth? And this is a very big thing, right? This is a very, very big thing. And you can only do this kind of analysis and evaluation when you're on your own. And you know, this is difficult for most people, because when we are on our own, like when we were in isolation, for example, we, people got very depressed, because being on your own is a punishment for most people. They don't like to be on their own. And the reason they don't like to be on their own is because when you're on your own, you have to face yourself. And whatever you are, you will be able to see it. And for a lot of people, that is very uncomfortable, very, very uncomfortable. But our deen tells us that we have to do this. We have to face reality, when we have to face ourselves, even though it might be uncomfortable. And we have to face our own evaluation. And if we are lucky enough to have close friends or people who give us evaluation, then we should think about it, that is this true or isn't it true? Right? So this is something very deep. This story on the surface is about some naughty kids, but it's a very true story, that we can make somebody else's, warp somebody else's reality, and we can warp our own reality by the way that we think. So the mind is very, very powerful, and our thoughts are very powerful, and we have to learn how to control our thoughts. Otherwise, our thoughts start to control us. And so up to this point, just because the mullah has been told by so many of his students that he's sick, suddenly he starts to feel sick. And this is a true phenomenon, even in the medical field. There's a term for it, that we can have imaginary sicknesses. It's called hypochondriac, that people start thinking that they have these aches and pains when they don't really have them. So it's all in the mind. You can see this is mind games. This story is about mind games. Mind games, people will play with us, and what we play with ourselves without even realizing them. So it's a very important story. So these children, they go into the Sheikh's room, and they sit down around his bed and begin to read aloud. Then a couple of the rascals whispered to the first student, "This isn't right. You made the mullah sick, and now we're still prisoners. You said that we would have a holiday." So the clever lad said, "Now we must gradually recite more loudly." He made a sign, and the boys began to read the lessons in loud voices, speaking loudly enough for the sheikh to hear. He said, "Boys, lower your voice. Be quiet for a time. This noise is harmful for our teacher. Noise is bad for a headache. Noise and commotion are not good for a sick man." The mullah approved of these words and said, "You're right. In fact, now that I'm not in good shape today, get up and go. Take the day off, and tomorrow we'll see how things are." "Yes, sir," said the students, trying to conceal their joy. "We hope that you get relief from your discomfort and get well very soon." They took their leave and went out, very happy at the success of their trick. When the children got home, the mothers asked them why they had come home so early. They replied, "The mullah is sick and he closed the door. He closed the school." However, some of the mothers did not believe their sons and they were afraid that their children were playing from school. The, the boys replied, "It's easy to prove. Go and ask the mullah's health." So a few of the mothers who were neighbors decided to make sure that their offspring were telling the truth. They went to the school to inquire about the condition of the mullah. They learned that yes, the mullah was sprawled on his bed, moaning and sighing from his headache. After doing that, the mother of the chief instigator of the trick said, "My husband is a doctor. I sent to him just now to come and bring some medicine." As soon as the doctor arrived, he took the sick man's pulse and examined his tongue. He found no sign of illness in the mullah. He was forced to ask, "Sir, what are your symptoms?" "My head aches," complained the mullah. "My body is numb. I'm in very bad shape. If you can't do something to cure the pain in my head, the rest is important. I'll sleep until I get better." When a patient lies, he misleads the physician. Since he wasn't a psychic, the doctor had to take the sick man at his word. So the doctor wrote a prescription and prescribed a headache potion. The medicine was brought, but as the mullah was not really sick, taking the medicine made things worse for him. And since the doctor had put him on a strict diet, he wasn't able to eat either. The result was that the mullah really became very sick and was forced to remain in bed for several days until he gradually began to recover. It was several days before the mullah was able to reopen his school, by which time the boys were tired of their games, and the mullah was bored with his idleness and illness. However, it is well known saying that to hear the truth, one must hear it from children. During the days of their holiday, wherever they went, in order to show how clever they were, they told their playmates the story of how they had made the mullah sick again and again. "The mullah wasn't sick, we made him sick." Their friends would ask, "How?" They would say, "One day we made an agreement. Hassan said one thing, Hussein said the same thing, Rida said the same thing, and Mr. Mullah got sick from his imagination." Eventually, the boys told the story to their parents in their homes. The women whispered it, and finally the mullah's wife heard about it. She told her husband, and he realized that they had deceived him with suggestions and fancies, and he knew that the medicine taken when he wasn't truly sick had made him ill. And so it happened that after that, the mullah would never close the school when he was sick. He would appoint a substitute teacher. So the trick of the clever students ultimately worked to their own detriment. Right, so as we mentioned before, that Rumi stories are teaching stories, learning stories, and we learn that somebody can get sick from their imagination, and not just sick from physically, but people can get sick mentally from the imagination too. Like if you believe that you are a victim, for example, right? The story that you tell yourself about yourself, and it's a story that you are the victim in that story, then you will always be a victim. But if you change that story and you tell yourself that no, I am not a victim, right? Things happen, people have problems. I was in the firing line of this or that, and so what? I have my life to live, and I refuse to live it as a victim. So if you tell yourself these things rather than go with the victim story, then you can rise above that in fact in this world you can rise above anything. And this is a very important story because it tells us the power of imagination, the power of our mind, the power of the social power of what we hear and what we start to believe. And it's very important in our time, that aspect, because we're living in a time of fake news. We're living on a time where everybody is getting onto the social media. Like today, I saw a clip about a man in another country who, made a video, and he said that I opened this organization of collecting charity 5 years ago, and I want to apologize to you because somebody approached me and they asked me what I'd done with the funds that I was supposed to send to Palestine and Syria, and I have to tell you that I used the money on something else, and I didn't use it on that, and I'm truly apologetic about that. So you can imagine that, this with this social media, which is so powerful on so many levels, but everybody is jumping on this bandwagon of coming and, telling their stories, and there's so much out there that we are, it's like you would never let your children go out at night on their own, right? Little kids, you would never let them go out on their own. And yet we let them free on the internet, right? They're free to go on the internet and meet and see and hear whatever comes up, whatever pops up. So subhanallah, and this is not just for the children, it's true for adults as well, that there is in a time when we're living with a fake news, and there's so much propaganda, and people trying to make you believe all sorts of things, and people trying to control our minds. We have to be very, very careful. We have to be very selective in what we listen to, what we interact with, and what we forward to other people as well. We have to be very selective. And because this story might have been written years ago, but it's about human nature. And our natures are like that. We have our weaknesses, we have our failures, Allah knows. But when we learn something, we have to be very, uh, we have to be very alert, and we have to also make our children, and not just children. Children sometimes are cleverer than adults. I say we're all gullible when we have to ask all the right questions, and we should be able to discuss with other people. And these are, when we go back to the Sunnah of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, about conversation, active listening, and consultations, doing shura with others, asking, is this true? Do you think this is true? Having a counselor who you can talk to. And a counselor is not just a paid counselor, like a professional counselor, but a friend, a dear friend, a family member, somebody who you can talk your problems over and get a second and a third opinion. When you do that, when you are able to do that, get a second, third, fourth opinions, then you will be saved from so much. And this is, so we have to go back to what the Prophet ﷺ taught us. And when we look at the sunnahs, this what the Prophet ﷺ taught us, it looks very simple. It looks very, very simple. Now, how is this going to save me from that? But when you put it into practice, you'll see that the simplest of the things are the most effective things. So this story is, on the surface of it, is about some children who play a trick on their teacher to get a day off and to play outside. But there are people in the world who play tricks on the general public and the general community, just uh, to make their means to fulfill their objectives and their goals, and they don't care about other people. And unfortunately, the world has become like that. We can see that people are following their own agenda, and they lead other people astray. And that's why this analysis, being able to do that, is very important. So that's the end of that story. Right, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. And the other story is a misunderstanding. So I'm going to quickly do this story. But I think it's a very important story and one that you might have heard before. Everybody has heard this, a form of this story. But the story is from Rumi. So I don't want to miss this story. It's called The Misunderstanding. So there were four beggars from four different countries who recently become acquainted and came to a village. So one spoke Persian, another Turkish, the third Arabic, and the last spoke Greek. Now, one day they are friends, and they used to, in the afternoon they would meet together and they would have their lunch together. So whatever everybody had, they would bring with them and they would share it. And so this particular story takes place in a time when it was summer and the weather was hot. And so they would meet under a tree, and on this day they only had bread to eat. They didn't have anything else to eat, and the bread was very dry. So they thought, if anybody has more money, let's please go and buy something, so that we can have it with this bread, because this bread is really, really dry. So a man is walking by and he looks at their dining cloth, and on it is just dry bread. So feeling sorry for them, he tosses a coin to them. And so the four men, they praise the generous man, and he give him du'as, and he goes on his way. So the Persian, he says, good, here is the money. It belongs to us. Now, one of us should go and buy some angur with it, right? He says, let's go and buy some angur. So the others say, no, we don't want angur, right? It belongs to all of us. So we don't like Persian food, so we don't want angur. So the Arab says that we should buy some inab. And so the others say, no, we don't like Arabic food, right? We shouldn't. I think the Greek says our food is very healthy. So we should go and buy some staphylia. So the Turk, he says, no, we don't like that. We will have some uzum today. Today we'll have some uzum. So they all start arguing about this, that they don't want to eat each other's food. So then they are having a big argument when an old man comes along, and he says, what is it that you're arguing about? So they tell him the story. They said, we are here together and we want to eat, but we only have one coin, and he wants to eat angur, and this one wants to eat inab, and this one wants to eat uzum, and this one wants to eat staphylia. So everybody has a different liking. So the old man starts laughing. Is that all it is? So they say, yes, that's what it's about. It's true that eating or not eating something is not all that important, but the problem is that no one wants to give in to the other, and that's not a laughing matter. So as it happens, the old man knows Persian, Arabic, Turkish, and Greek. So he laughs again. You're right, he said, no one wants to be forced, but I am laughing because there is no question of force here. Your dispute is a dispute about words. You're wasting your time arguing. I know that you have no disagreement. What does that mean? Asked the four. It means, said the old man, that most wars and disputes are like your disagreement over what to eat. They arise from ignorance and lack of information. All of the people living in this world want the same thing. Big differences are about other things. What are you trying to say? I want to know whether each of you is ready to take his portion of the money for himself and with it that of the others. They said, it's nothing like that. It's not a question of more or less. We're arguing about the kind of food. Look, said the old man, big disputes are always about more or less. So you don't have a big dispute. Know that all of you want the same thing. Angur, inab, uzum, and staphylia are all the same thing, grapes. Instead of letting your argument grow worse, go and buy some grapes and eat them in happiness. So the four men were delighted and laughed, oh, good man, may God prolong your life. We didn't know, and we were about to start fighting with our fists. Now we've learned that we'd better improve our understanding before we take offense. So they brought the grapes and they ate them together in friendship. They vowed never to forget the lesson of the grapes. So this is a very familiar story. It's about four people speaking four different languages and they're having a misunderstanding. And many of our arguments and disagreements are like this. They are about words. We want the same thing, but we're so hung up on our words and our egos take precedence over our words. And we don't want to listen to what the other person is actually saying. And that's where our arguments come from. And the old man put it very clearly, and this is something that we have to learn, that when there is an argument or a dispute or a disagreement or a war, first we have to look at, is it a real problem? Or are we just talking a different language? So if it's a real problem, then it will be a problem of injustice, more or less, right? If that, then that is a real problem. But if we want the same thing, but we are just talking different languages, then this comes from ignorance, because we're unable to express ourselves, to understand the other person with deep listening, and we're unable to come and make a compromise and come in the middle and be able to discuss. So the first thing to determine in an argument is this a real argument, or is it about words? Are we really all wanting the same things, but we're unable to communicate it to each other? Or is this about more or less? Is somebody's rights being usurped? Is injustice being meted out? So that is something that we have to determine. So this story is, there's many levels in here too. One of them is about learning a person's language. And this might also be, even if you speak the same language, like men and women, they talk differently. The languages are different. Children and adults, their language is different. Then, depending on the personality, the mizaj of a person, their languages are different. And there's a book, The 5 Different Love Languages, which became very popular because this book talked about how different people respond to different things. Like some people's love language might be gifts, that they enjoy giving and receiving gifts. So that's how they communicate their love. Some people's might be just talking things out, right? So even if you give that person a gift, it won't be as important as if you had communicated things to them. So different people have different languages. So this, again, is a human skill. It's very important that we learn this. Some people are naturally very good at it, and some people are not good at it, but it can be learned. And the other thing is, another level of languages is that if you come from different cultures, the languages are different, even if you speak the same language. Because many times, if you're speaking it as a second language, a third language, then you're still translating in your mind from your first language. And when you do that, the thoughts and ideas come from your first language, right? It's important to understand this. So people who's speaking, say they're speaking in English, but it's their second language, then they might come across as being rude, or they might come across as being aggressive or something like that. But really what they're doing is they're translating from their language into English. And so it sounds different. So that's another thing, that when you learn a language, you have to learn the cultural nuances of that language. You have to learn how that language is spoken, not only how it's spoken, but also the culturally, what the words mean, and how things are translated, and if it's polite to say this or if it's not polite to say that. And then even that one language, depending on which country it comes from, it can be different. Subhanallah. So there's so many things in communication. Sometimes when you read everything, it seems like it's better just to keep your mouth shut and not say anything, which is also a good policy, right? Because silence is golden. But if we are going to speak, and we have to find the best words so that we don't offend, we have to find the best ways and means of saying something, and then also tuning into other people's psychologies. That's so important. So there's so many things that go on in communication, right? There's so many things. Sometimes we are talking and somebody might be telling us a problem and they don't want an answer. They just want to be heard, because just listening to somebody deep listening is a very big gift in itself. To be heard as a human being, to be heard is a fundamental need. So just to listen to somebody, deep listening without doing anything else, without the phone, without this, is very important. And this is very important, especially for children, teenagers, because we're living in a world where we're so distracted and we're multitasking all the time, because there's so much going on. And this is a symptom of our minds, because our minds are like that. So because our minds are so distracted, our world becomes so distracted. And that's why you'll see people trying to do 3 things at one time. And when we interact with children like this, then they get this feeling that we don't care. So it's very important that children and teenagers get very deep listening, so that they feel like their point of view was heard, and to really try to understand it, not provide all the answers, not argue with them, not say, oh, you're wrong and this is wrong, and no, just listen and say, I see, let me think about it, I see. This is very important, because young people, one of the reasons that they are feeling the way that they're feeling right now is because of this distraction that they're getting from all over. That even in their families, even with the people that they are closest to, they're not having wholesome relationships. And so one of the first things about a relationship is giving another person deep listening, so that you really listen to them and you understand them. And then looking at how you communicate, that's very important. So look, not just the word, it's not just the words, but the feelings behind those words. What is it that you're really trying to say? What is it? What's the tone? What's the intention behind it? And the person will pick up the tone more than the words. So that's another point that we have to consider. And living in a world where there is so much misunderstanding, where wars are like, there's wars upon wars upon wars, and these are individual in every home. There's fires everywhere. Yeah. At that time, this peace and going back to your fundamental basic humanity, which is about being able to give another human being respect and deep listening, and the few words that you give them have to be good words. And so this story, this story about the misunderstanding is really about that how misunderstandings happen, and learning the languages of other people, even if you're speaking the same language, by the way. So that's a beautiful story. So the next story, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, we don't have that much time, but I'm going to end with this story because it's a spiritual story, and one that you might have heard, very possibly heard before. It's called The Language of Animals. So this man, he comes to Musa and he says, Musa alayhi salam, and he says, "Oh Moses, I have believed in you for many years, but I haven't gotten any benefit from your religion, so I've come to you today with a request." "Tell me what your request is," Moses said. "If I can, I'll do it." "I want you to ask God," said the man, "to teach me the language of animals. I want to learn valuable lessons from their conversations." "I don't want to be a spoilsport," said Moses, "but I don't think this will be advisable for you. You can learn as much as you need from your own experience and the experiences of your friends, and also from books and the records of the lives of others. Do you think that you have learned everything there is to be learned from these things, so that now you must learn from the animals too? First, go and learn as much as you can using your own human language, and that should be enough for 70 generations. So Musa alayhi salam is telling him to learn from what? He tells him that learn from your own experiences, from your friends' experiences, from books, and the records of the lives of others. That means historical records. So he's giving him 4 sources to go and learn from. So this man, he's saying that he wants to learn the language of animals. So Musa al-Islam says to him, as for learning the language of animals, that's just a whim and idle longing. Too much of that brings trouble to a man. But the man was insistent. No, I don't want to use the language of animals for personal gain. I want to understand some new things. I have dogs in my house, I have chickens, I have donkeys, I have sheep. I want to know what they're saying to each other. I want to improve my own character through their words. Very well, said Moses. You want to know what they are saying? I want to know many things too, but when it isn't right, it's better not to know. Come listen to me. Put all away this fancy and go back to your work. Don't think too much about being clever, for too much cleverness may bring with it much woe. But the man said, I can't give it up. I've got to learn the language of animals. I'll accept the pain and trouble. You are not ungenerous. Ask God to teach me the language of chickens and dogs. I'll be satisfied if I learn just those two. Very well, sighed Moses. As long as you are willing to accept the trouble it may bring, I'll pray that you may understand the language of chickens and dogs, but I'm not responsible if you lose anything by it. Happy and pleased, the man went home. When night came, he went to sleep and woke up early. The next morning, he said to his servant, Bring me breakfast and let the dog and rooster come in. The servant released the dog from the kennel and the rooster from the chicken coop, then prepared his master's breakfast. When he brought it, a piece of bread fell to the floor from his hand. The rooster jumped up, snatched the bread, and ate it. The dog grumbled, saying, What a rotten rooster you are. You eat wheat, you eat millet, you eat barley, you eat flies, you eat cockroaches, you hunt in the garden and eat earthworms and 1,000 other things. You know that I can't get anything other than that bread, yet you wouldn't even let me eat that one breadcrumb. Don't fret, said the rooster. In its place tomorrow you will have a happy day. Meat is tastier than anything else to you, and tomorrow the master's horse will fall dead, and you'll be able to eat as much meat as you want. Good, said the dog. I'd forgotten about that. As long as things are thus, you eat the bread. Enjoy your meal. Upon hearing this exchange, the master mused, Incredible. So the horse is going to die tomorrow. It's a good thing that I found this out. Learning the language of animals is indeed useful. He immediately summoned his groom and said to him, Take that horse to the market and sell it for whatever it will bring. The groom took the horse to the market and sold it. He gave the money to his master, who was delighted that he had not lost the value of the horse. The following morning at breakfast, the master threw a piece of bread to the dog, but the rooster was too nimble and snatched the bread from the dog. Said the dog, Dear rooster, look, yesterday you said that the horse would die, but it didn't happen. The master sold it, and today once again you're eating the breakfast bread, and I must remain hungry until noon. I didn't lie, said the rooster. The horse was supposed to die, but the master sold it, and the horse died in the stable of the man who bought it. But since it was ordained that the master must suffer some loss, and it didn't happen yesterday, today his donkey will die. The death of a donkey is like a wedding feast for a dog. Tomorrow you'll eat meat. But I won't, as I can't eat meat. That's right, exclaimed the dog. I'd forgotten. May the bread nourish you. Having heard this, the master immediately called his groom and told him to take the donkey to the market and sell it for whatever price he could get. On the third day, the dog said to the rooster at breakfast, You say something every day and your promises make me feel good, but the next day you go back on your word and there is no meat. Forget about the first day when the master's horse was supposed to die, but he sold it. The second day when I had hopes of eating donkey meat, he sold the donkey. If that's the way it is to be, you shouldn't eat the bread at breakfast. After all, I have some rights in this household too. That's right, said the rooster, but I don't understand how the master has become so smart and astute. Every day he fends off another loss. However, anything which has a substitute is no cause for complaint. This morning at dawn, while I was praying, I heard that in place of the horse and donkey which the master was sold, 4 of his black sheep will die. Well, when they die, the bodies will be taken and thrown away in the desert, as carrion meat is unlawful. Then you can go to the desert and eat as much as you want. It's lawful for you. I know about that, said the dog. One can't prevent all loss. The horse was sold and the donkey was sold. In their place, the black sheep will die. Fine, I'll be patient. Upon hearing this, the master ordered his shepherd to take the 4 black sheep to the market and sell them. The shepherd did as he was told, and the master said to himself, the knowledge of the language of animals is indeed very profitable, and he was very pleased with himself. He thanked God and rejoiced, saying, I've prevented loss from my own property. I've learned the speech of dogs and chickens. I've gained gold and sold loss. So the next day, when the rooster and the dog got together for breakfast, the dog quarreled with the rooster, saying, It's my turn today. I know what was supposed to happen, but it all turned out differently. The horse was sold, the donkey was sold, and even the sheep were sold. But I can't stay hungry until noon every day. Our master is very clever. Whatever loss there is supposed to be, he prevents it. Don't count too much on the master's cleverness, replied the rooster. Too much shrewdness can end badly, for the master himself will die today. Then his family and relatives will give alms. They'll distribute bread, they'll distribute stew, they will slaughter sheep. There will be much to enjoy, and you'll have your portion too. Oh, exclaimed the dog, how do you know that? When I was at prayer this morning, said the rooster, I heard it. Our master wasn't supposed to die this soon, but he has acquired some things unlawfully. Just as when a person's blood is diseased, his blood is let out by cupping, or leeches are applied to suck out the bad blood. So he was supposed to suffer some losses to compensate for this. His horse was to die, but the clever man sold it. Then in place of that, the donkey was supposed to die, but the master sold the donkey too. Then the 4 sheep were supposed to die, but he prevented any loss to himself from that. These were supposed to compensate for injuries of the unlawful acts to his soul. Since he didn't allow those things to happen, now the calamity will fall on his own neck. He cannot sell that. How strange, said the dog. Yes, continued the rooster, too much cleverness can be the cause of a disaster, even death. Hearing these words, the master trembled with terror. He left his breakfast untouched and hurried to the residence of the prophet. Upon greeting him, the man said, O Moses, alayhi salam, help me. I am ruined. What happened? Asked Moses. Why are you afraid? I'm not just afraid, the man said. I am certain that something awful will happen to me. And then he related what happened and said, what can I do? I don't want to die. I warned you that learning the language of animals would bring you no good, said Moses. There is nothing now that I can do. I can't interfere in God's work. I have no power over life and death. As you said, it had been ordained that you would suffer some property losses, but you prevented them. They were the shield to fend off calamity from you. You wanted to improve your character, but instead you sold your horse, your donkey, and sheep and brought trouble for yourself. There can be no cheating in the works of God. I am powerless, but there is one thing you could do. I beseech you, tell me, what should I do? Weren't the horse, the donkey, and the sheep supposed to be arms to protect your life? Asked Moses. So you could go to the men who bought the animals and suffered the loss that you were supposed to incur and ask for their forgiveness. Return the money to at least one of them and take the loss upon yourself. If one of them, at least one of them, and take the loss upon yourself, if one of them agrees, perhaps your fate will be altered. You spoken rightly, said the man. I'll go right away and fix things. He took off running and went to the shepherd. Whom did you sell the sheep to? He asked. I sold them to Yunus, replied the shepherd. The master ran to the house of farmer Yunus and said, Yunus, were you the one who bought that four dying black sheep yesterday? Yes, he said, and it's a good thing that I did because all four of them died that very day. No, said the man, it was very bad. You suffered a loss and I've come to make it up to you. I want to return your money to you and I want you to excuse me because I knew ahead of time that you were going to die when I sold them. I'm very sorry for what I did. It's not possible for me to take back the money, insisted Eunice. I'm very happy with the way things turned out. Do you know that I had a dispute with somebody? I wanted to take the four sheep to the judge's house and give them as a bribe so that he would issue a verdict in my favor. But since the sheep died that very day, I wasn't able to do that. Then I heard the judge had ordered that if anyone brought a bribe to his house, that person would be seized and thrown in prison. The judge said anyone who tries to give a bribe wants to prevent the truth, and for that crime he should be punished. So you see, it was a good thing that the sheep died. If they hadn't, I'd be in prison right now. I thank God that a small loss saved me from a greater catastrophe. That's why the purchase was a good deal. The money is yours. I've learned a lesson worth more than 100 sheep and 1,000 pieces of silver. The man realized that he had failed, so he returned home at once and asked his groom who had bought the donkey, Elias. So he ran to the house of Elias, and Elias wouldn't take the money. And he said that some of my friends had donkeys and they had decided to ride them to a certain village the night before last. Since I didn't have a donkey, I wouldn't have been able to go with them. I was very upset about that until the day before yesterday when I bought your donkey in the morning. I told my friends that I would be coming with them after all, but the donkey got sick at noon, fell down, and died. I had to let them know that I wouldn't be able to go with them after all, and I was very disappointed. My friends left without me, and as they were crossing some open land, they met a pack of rabid wolves. The wolves tore their donkeys to pieces and bit them badly. They're all still in the hospital. When I heard that, I thanked God that my donkey had died and averted the calamity from my neck. If not, I would now be lying in the hospital too. If I had bought a different donkey, a healthy one, I would have gone with them and suffered their fate. Ilya smiled. For this reason, I am happy and satisfied with the deal. I don't want your money. Indeed, if you wish, I'll give you more money for that donkey. The man saw that he had failed again. He went quickly back to his groom and learned from him who had bought the horse. He sought out the house of Ibrahim and said to him, Ibrahim, did you buy a horse on the point of death a couple of days ago? Yes, I did, and it's a good thing that I did buy it because the horse died that very day. No, said the man, that was very bad. That horse was mine, and I knew that it was about to die. Now I've come to make the restitution and give you your money back so that you may be content with me. I can't possibly take the money back, said Ibrahim firmly. That horse was very beneficial for me, and I'm quite satisfied with things the way they are. Do you know that on that day I had to travel on some business to a distant village? I found a traveler going to the same place. He had a horse, and I said to myself that I should buy a horse so that I can go with him. I went to the market and bought your horse because it was cheaper than any of the others. A few minutes later, it neighed and fell dead. At first, I was very unhappy about that, and I decided not to postpone my trip. Later, I learned that the man I was planning to travel with went anyway and fell into the hands of a highwayman in the desert. They took his horse and nearly beat him to death. That's why I thank God that the death of the horse prevented me from going on that journey. Otherwise, I would have lost the horse, and God knows what would have happened to me at the hands of those brigands. So I'm very satisfied with the loss that saved me from a greater affliction. Dear friend, pleaded the man desperately, now that things are right with you, come and take back your money, because I am sorry that I sold you that dying horse. I'm in deep trouble now that you can only save me from. Since you say that you were aware of the horse's defect and you sold the horse deceitfully, I'm not about to do that, replied Ibrahim in a hard voice. How do I know that there is not another trick in your wanting to give back the money? Whatever it may be, go back to some and think of something else. I'm not interested. I'm satisfied with the deal that we made, and there's no reason to take your money for nothing. Disappointed once again, the man said to himself, I'll return to Moses and seek another solution. These people who don't know the language of animals are smarter than I am and should have learned from their actions. I wish that I had not learned the language of animals. So the man returned back. On the way, he passed his own house. Seeing the rooster sitting on a wall, the man said to him, Rooster, you have brought all this ruin upon me. I've been feeding you all your life. What business do you have with foretelling the future? I was minding my own business, said the rooster. What business do you have with the language of animals when you couldn't learn from the language of people? At that moment, the man felt sick. He fell to the ground and surrendered his soul to the creator of life. The end. And there's a lot of lessons to be learned from this story. And one is, do not wish for things if you don't know what the effects of them are going to be. And even if you do wish for it and Allah gives it to you, then be careful because you don't know what it's going to bring to you. Another important point is when calamities happen, they are to ward off something else which would be bigger and more evil in your life. So when a small calamity happens, then say Alhamdulillah and don't be so upset about it that your world collapses, because you don't know what you have been warded off from in this world and in the hereafter. You don't know what Allah has taken away from you because of this. Right? You don't know what Allah has protected you from because of this. So say Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un when something terrible happens, but say that Allah in His wisdom knows why this is happening and knows why this is happening to me. I'm certain that something bigger and worse is being taken away from me, either in this world or in the hereafter. And I'm very happy and content in the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is an important story about being content, number one, learning from the right sources, number two, trusting in the wisdom of Allah, that sometimes we can't see the far-reaching effects of a certain thing. When something happens, we don't know why it's happening or what the end results are, or what Allah's plan is. And that's usually the case for everything in this world, right? We don't know the wisdom behind things. And so we have to become humble and we have to trust in the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have to absolutely trust in the wisdom of Allah because He knows every single piece of the puzzle and we don't. And this is a piece of the puzzle of our own lives and the piece of the puzzle of the dunya, the world as well. So with that, we're going to end. And next Friday, inshallah, will be the Eid. And I wish you a very happy and a very joyous Eid with your family, inshallah. Be safe and enjoy the meat and enjoy the spirit of the Eid as well. And, learn what was behind all of this, inshallah. Behind the fifth pillar of Islam. Hajj is the fifth pillar of Islam, and there's so many things associated with it. And it is our heritage. So learn about this from good sources and connect them into your life, inshallah. So next Friday we won't have a halaqah, but inshallah after that we will continue with our halaqahs, inshallah. So I'll see you then. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.